Is it possible to recover from family scapegoating abuse? Yes, it is. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today on Beyond Family Scapegoating Abuse. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Mandeville, author of Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed, Help and Hope for Adults in the Family Scapegoat Role. And today I'm going to give an overview of the process of recovering and healing from what I named family scapegoating abuse. Family scapegoating abuse is an invisible form of abuse. It's very insidious. It's very subtle. It's difficult to describe to others, and it's difficult to recognize even when it's happening to you. Therefore, the first step is to understand this form of abuse, and that will help you to identify it and know if you are suffering from it. In my book, Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed, I open the book early on with a family scapegoating abuse self-assessment, and there's a lot of questions there regarding childhood experiences and present day experiences. And in another chapter, I have 16 experiences that are common to adult survivors of family scapegoating. And so if you get a lot of yeses in that assessment in my book, the FSA assessment, and if you're identifying with a lot of those 16 experiences that scapegoated children and adults encounter, you may be suffering from what I call family scapegoating abuse. So that's step one, to recognize and acknowledge that you may have been impacted by this particular form of psycho-emotional abuse. What I know from my years of research on family scapegoating abuse is that a high percentage of FSA adult survivors are also suffering from unrecognized symptoms of complex trauma, or C-PTSD. I have a chapter in this same book on complex trauma, and I list the main symptoms of complex trauma, and then I list the symptoms identified via my research that FSA adult survivors experience. So again, if you're relating with a lot of the complex trauma symptoms and the symptoms of FSA that I identified in my research that are included in this complex trauma chapter in my book, Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed, that is also going to be helpful in regard to you understanding what you might be suffering from. Next, once you recognize what you might be suffering from, you need an appropriate environment to recover and heal within. And that means you need an emotionally safe environment and a physically safe environment. And if you are not in such an environment, it will be very difficult, obviously, to recover. So when I have people come to me who, for financial reasons or health reasons, are living currently with abusive family members, that's the first thing we need to address. And I'm certainly not going to encourage the client to open up and be very vulnerable when they're in that environment, because it could cause them harm to make themselves vulnerable in such an environment. So I either have to limit the type of recovery we can do together, recovery work, or we need to get them into a different living situation. And I know that can be a hard one to hear if you are currently dependent on family members who treat you abusively. But again, I have to think of the possible consequences of having a client go to deep places or work through trauma when they're not in an emotionally safe environment. For people who are wanting and needing and ready to do this work, who are in heavy contact with abusive family members, I'm going to need to invite the client to look at limiting contact for a time. And during that time, we can better determine how much contact there should be depending on the dynamics going on between the family and the scapegoated adult client. If you cannot limit contact or you are living with family members who are scapegoating you, you can still participate in psychoeducational processes that really can go a long way to helping someone recover from this form of abuse. And that's exactly why I wrote my book, Rejected, Shamed, and Blamed. It's a psychoeducational book. It's not a process book. It's not the classic self-help recovery book. But in it, I let people know what FSA is, family scapegoating abuse, and I let people know what the recovery pathway is. And I do education on family systems so that people can better understand that this is often fueled, this form of abuse, by the family projective identification process, which I've already done a couple of videos on. And I'll link those below in the description for this video and in the pinned comment. For those people who are living in a safe emotional environment and are able and ready to do the deeper recovery work, it will be critical that you find a trauma-informed therapist to work with if you identified with having complex trauma symptoms from my book in that chapter where you can look at the various symptoms listed. If you didn't identify as having complex trauma symptoms but do feel you are scapegoated by your family, a trauma-informed coach who understands family systems can be helpful. And there are people trained in that, and I'll link to a search engine that you can find such a coach for that purpose. If you have complex trauma, however, you do need a licensed clinician trained in trauma-informed approaches, and that is because to heal complex trauma, we need to be able to work with the body. Trauma is stored in the body, and that is why approaches such as sensory motor psychotherapy, EMDR can help with complex trauma, although it was developed more for PTSD versus C-PTSD. Any modality, and I list many of them in my book toward the end, that is known to help with complex trauma can be very helpful for the scapegoated adult. I also talk in my book how to approach a therapist about a possible low fee slot that ethically many therapists keep. Some therapists have a couple pro bono spots they keep for people who can't afford to pay at all. I talk in my book about how to go about finding an appropriate therapist. And I have an article, in fact, on my website where you can look at that. It's in the main menu, 10 self-care tips for adult survivors of FSA. And I talk there about how to find a therapist. But you are going to need that type of professional help. And I would stop at nothing to find such a person. It's going to be very hard to recover from this form of abuse by reading just self-help books or working with people who are not trauma-informed. It's not going to help do the kind of repairs, including in regard to the neural pathways and rewiring the brain, that's needed for recovering from this form of invisible abuse. It's also very helpful to be involved with a healthy forum, a healthy group that's focused on recovery, a group that can acknowledge anger appropriately, but not be stuck in the anger. People who are taking responsibility for their healing and hopefully understanding this is a form of abuse that's really tragic for everyone involved. Often the family that's doing the scapegoating's caught in this family projective identification process. There's often generations of trauma fueling this. So a group that has compassion not only for self, but for suffering family members and this applies even if you feel you need to go no contact, that we can do this with some sense of compassion, even for the people we no longer can have contact with, because they're suffering too in ways they're not even aware of. Groups that also can acknowledge grief, those are groups that I would consider to be a healthy group versus a support group that is angry post after angry post and demonizing and dehumanizing family members. It might feel satisfying in the beginning, but in the end, ultimately, you're not going to get the healthiest kinds of support that is needed when you are trying to recover from family scapegoating abuse. In terms of psychoeducation, a book I use with my clients that you can use with a therapist or coach, and even on your own, you could learn quite a bit. And that is a psychoeducational book by Janina Fisher, PhD, called Transforming the Living Legacy of Trauma, a workbook for survivors and therapists, again, by Janina Fisher, PhD. And she did a lot of work in the field of complex trauma for decades now, and she did work closely with Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, and it's a wonderful workbook. And once my clients have gone through that workbook, I invite them to do the Mindful Self-Compassion workbook, A Proven Way to Accept Yourself, Build Inner Strength, and Thrive, by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, both PhDs. And I'll be putting links to those books through the Amazon shop I have on my website that you can take a look at. Those can be very helpful for people recovering from family scapegoating abuse. And lastly, I like to remind people of the importance of disidentifying from the scapegoat narrative, from your family's story about you, the story that has nothing to do with your true self or who you actually are. And in my book, I use the story of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot. Family scapegoating abuse is like a Gordian knot. It's a tangled web. It's filled with projection processes, intergenerational trauma. You can try to untangle it and undo it for years, and it's going to be impossible. And just as with Alexander the Great, who used a sword to slice through the knot, your sword for recovering from this tangled knot of family scapegoating abuse that you were caught in, perhaps from a very young age, your sword is the sword of truth, the truth of who you really are, and disidentifying and releasing the family scapegoat narrative. Release that narrative, reclaim the truth of who you are, reclaim your life, and reclaim your story. And if you don't feel you have a story, go make a story that you want to live, and live your life being true to who you are, free of the shaming, blaming, rejecting, scapegoat narrative. This is a brief overview of some of the steps that I take my clients through on their journey of recovering from family scapegoating abuse. I hope you'll subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Within a month or so, I'll be able to do longer videos and better editing quality, and it will expand upon all the videos I've done to date. I'll be digging deep into all the subjects I've covered so far. And if you haven't already, take a minute to hit the thumbs up and like this video. That lets YouTube know it's worth seeing, and they'll put it on other people's home feeds. And there's so many people suffering from FSA who need to hear this message. I'll be coming back with another video soon answering subscriber question of the week, and I'll look forward to seeing you then.